Opinions and ideas expressed in the following Moraine Valley Broadcast Channel recording are those of its creators and do not represent the views of Moraine Valley Community College.
Hello, everybody. Good day. My name is Eric. With me today is Carmelo Chimera, owner of Chimera Comics. Thank you, Carmelo, for joining us today. Why don't you introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about yourself, about your background, education, and where you're coming from.
Sure. Well, thanks for having me. It's nice to be here. I'm a Southside suburbs native here in Chicago, and I went to college for philosophy at Carthage College in Kenosha, Wisconsin. After that, I attended the University of Chicago Law School. I am a practicing attorney here in Illinois. In 2010, when I was about to start my first year of law school, my good friend Stephen Brown asked me if I'd be interested in opening a comic book store with him. And because I have no sense of self-preservation, I said, sure, why not? And that following May, we opened up our first store in LaGrange. Since then, Chimera's Comics has expanded to two other locations, one in Oak Lawn, my hometown, and one in Woodridge, Illinois. And it's going pretty great. We're celebrating our 5th birthday now. The reason it all kind of started was this graphic novel that we were working on, and it's finally about to come to fruition. So it feels like 5 years is coming full circle.
Awesome. That must be pretty hectic for you, being both a practicing lawyer as well as a store owner, I would take it.
I think hectic's a good way to describe it, yeah. It's pretty crazy, and I feel like I'm always 2 steps behind, but I keep trying to make it all happen.
Fantastic. You said before your Kickstarter is called Magnificent, correct?
That's right. Yes. Right. It's named after the Magnificent Mile in Chicago.
Okay. Can you tell us a bit about it? What's the story? What are the characters? A little bit about the book.
Well, The Magnificent is about a teenage superhero who, at the start of our story, is captured and imprisoned. He's being tortured and experimented on. And the torture he goes through reminds him of the pains of growing up. And we flash back and see that he learns the lessons that we all do. He learns about heartbreak, he learns about failure, and he learns about perseverance. Now, in the future, when he discovers what his true superpower is, he's able to escape. And the question is, will the torture and pain he's gone through turn him into a villain, or can he choose to be a hero despite all the bad things that happen to him?
Awesome. So it's a coming-of-age story, basically.
That's right, yeah. In many ways, it was a college metaphor when I first wrote it in 2009. It was meant to be about when you leave home and you leave that naivety and innocence behind, what happens to you when you start to get exposed to the cruelty of the world. And I wanted to have some message that, no matter what happens to you, ultimately it's up to you. For good or for bad, it's up to you.
Awesome. Is this your first graphic novel you've worked on, or have you done this before?
This is the first. It's meant to be the pilot for a bigger universe of stories. And because it was so well received by our store community, I think we're going to keep doing more comic books and more graphic novels in the future.
Oh, fantastic. What's your target release date for this book?
We're shooting for the very end of June. It'll coincide with our 5th anniversary. We did our grand opening on June 24th, 2011. So the hope is to have it come out right around that time.
Oh, fantastic. Do you have a publisher lined up, or are you just self-publishing at the moment?
We decided to sort of turn the stores into a publishing house of sorts. Okay. I think today it's very interesting with the technology that we have available to us. I'm not sure what a publisher does anymore. All right, they could provide the money to print it. Well, we crowdfunded it, so that's not an issue. The crowd paid for it, right? Because they wanted it. So we don't need a publisher for that. Maybe the publisher does marketing, but again, with digital marketing, I can reach customers all over the globe for, a few cents per click, right? So marketing doesn't make sense anymore. I guess the last thing a publisher really does for you is distribute. But, we've got a lot of relationships with retailers that are already interested in carrying the book. 11 retailers so far are going to carry the book, and I don't even have the product yet. So right. I think we're going to build up our own channels of distribution, and every time we put out a new graphic novel, that gets easier and easier. So, we've really become a publishing company.
Right, and with the addition of digital comics, you really don't really need that gatekeeper, so to speak, with the publishers, like you were just saying before. That whole, with the advent of technology, it's very becoming a changing industry, I would think.
Definitely, yeah. I mean, there's more and more independent comic books out there, maybe now more than ever, because you can find your target audience, all over the world. If you want to write a post-apocalyptic novel about cheerleaders, there are people on this great planet of ours, of 7 billion people, who want that comic, and you can go find them now wherever they are. They don't need to be close to you. And as far as, again, paying to create these things, you had these publishers as this kind of gatekeeper trying to decide before the fact whether or not the public would buy your book. But now you don't have that. You can show your product to the public and let the public decide if they want it, which I love as a fan as much as a creator. I back a lot of Kickstarter projects because I get to say, I want that to exist. Now that's up to us, not up to these giant mega corporations.
Exactly. And I think that's fantastic, actually, with the fact that the fans sort of decide to have a more vocal input into the comic book industry as a whole. Speaking of which, transition to your store, actually. How do you feel business is at this time? Are you seeing a rise in business or a decrease in business at the moment?
Well, it's a great time, I think, for comic books because the mixed media that's coming out has broadened the audience base, right? We've got these huge blockbuster movies, and I see the effects of those firsthand because our Woodridge store is right next to Hollywood Boulevard Cinema, which is a partner of ours. And when people show up for Batman vs. Superman, they come next door, literally next door to Chimera's Comics. So we see it firsthand. And I think what's really special about that, and I think the reason it's so good for business, is there is a genuine interest in the stories and the characters. This is not the height of the comic industry. That came about 15 years ago, maybe maybe more like 20 years ago. And in the 90s, sales were off the charts and many, many times what they are now. But that was because a lot of people were speculating. They were buying comics expecting some future value. And then that bubble burst. So that interest, those sales, those weren't genuine. Those were inflated. Now people go and they see Ant-Man or Guardians of the Galaxy and they say, I want to know more. I want to read that story. So for that reason, I think this is a great time for business and comics.
Yeah, in the 90s, it was all about the spectator boom with the whole collector editions and stuff like that, and the whole graphic covers and the whole edition of like multiple variant covers, which we still have today. Unfortunately, in my opinion at least, with the whole Hollywood blockbuster industry with comic book movies, do you feel that has like influenced the writing and sort of editorial mandate of their comics, particularly Marvel and DC, or do you sort of reject that theory?
Well, that's a good question. There's no denying that the publishers tie into the movies in very concrete ways. For instance, X-Men Apocalypse is coming out this month, and surprise, surprise, Marvel has the first Apocalypse storyline going on in a couple of years, right? So, but that's not a bad thing when they do that, because people are going to come into my store and they're going to say, hey, I saw X-Men Apocalypse. What can I read with Apocalypse in it? And I can give them something brand new. It's really easy to recommend. So they do. The answer to your question is yes, but that's not a bad thing. Sometimes it gets to be a bad thing to the fans when they start to retcon for the non nerds out there. That means retroactively amend the continuity to bring stories closer to the movies. I feel like fans don't really care for that. For example, the Marvel movies can't use mutants because of the studio rights distribution. Right. So the Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch on the Avengers aren't mutants. They've become Inhumans. And the comic adjusted to match that. And I think a lot of people who've been reading about Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch since the 60s don't take very kindly to that. So yeah, I mean, that influence is there and it goes both ways. But I think at the end of the day, I think those comic books are still leading the cart. You know what I mean?
I definitely would agree with that. And like right now, the industry with like Marvel and DC is just now pointing out that DC Rebirth, which is coming.
Right.
You have Marvel with the whole prior to Secret Wars with the Marvel Now imprint, where there was just an onslaught of new number ones.
Yeah.
Do you feel that's somewhat dying down though, the sort of overwhelming bombardment of number ones, or do you still think that's sort of on the rise? Do you think that's effectively hurting or helping the industry?
Well, that's a pretty layered question. I guess the quick answer is no. It's not dying down. As you pointed out, DC's doing a rebirth in June. That's going to have a whole new slew of number ones. Marvel just did that with All New, All Different.
Right.
And a year prior, they had Marvel Now. And so some of these books didn't hit issue 12 before they were getting issue 1. Sometimes it's a bad thing, right? Because I think it's gimmicky. It does work to increase sales when there's number ones, but the focus needs to be on the quality stories, right? This, as a quick aside, might be why people are getting more and more interested in independent comic books, because I think there's, they tend to be more focused on the story, and it's less about how do we run 40 years stories. It's more about how do I tell one good one. But back to the publishers, it's a mixed bag though, because the number ones aren't a bad thing in the sense that they make this accessible to new readers. I mean, should we really be in this industry that's been here for, almost 100 years? Should Action Comics be on issue 1216? Like, is that a good thing? It's kind of cool as a milestone, but what are we doing really except keeping new readers away? We don't want that. Number ones are a great chance for me to introduce new readers to comics, and they come into my store every day looking for number ones. So it's a mixed bag.
Yeah, like it's sometimes when you sort of shine away from the, say, number 1,000, it's missing that legacy, I believe, with the sort of bombardment with number ones. But yeah, now with DC Rebirth, they're going back to the old numbering system with Detective Comics and Action Comics. So I think sort of speeding up the process to get to that glorious, number 1,000, so to speak. Also, there's the new edition of digital comics. Do you feel that digital comics sort of take away the experience of comic book reading, or do you feel that's a good thing?
Yeah, that's another good question is, 5 years ago, everyone was saying, don't open a comic book store, the digital stuff's going to replace the print stuff. And that hasn't happened yet, and so I don't think it's very likely to. The experience is different. So the digital, if you read like Comixology, they've got kind of a cool guided read that I really enjoy, where it takes you, instead of you see the whole page, it starts with the first panel and the most important part of the first panel. Then it moves to the second, and it's kind of cool because you can more control where the reader's eye go. And that's very interesting, and I think that's a cool thing. As far as versus the print, though, there is definitely a loss. There is something about holding that physical comic book in your hand. There's just no replacing it. And there are people who will, they'll buy the same comic in different formats just because that experience changes in a meaningful way. A lot of people have Watchmen as a paperback, right? But then they went and bought, I did, the Absolute Edition hardcover that was oversized and had extra material, and it's got super nice paper. It even smells nice. It's really hard to replace.
Right. And with the whole, there's also just something about going to the actual comic book store and being immersed in that whole comic book community, being able to interact with one another about your passion with others. And when you're reading just digital, I feel you don't get that experience. Would you agree with that?
I do agree with that, because I think what you see a lot of is people have these great passions for these really small niches, and a comic book store is the place to go and share that with other people. I think that's something that Chimera's Comics does that sets it apart, and some of the newer stores that follow suit follow that as well, which is we're not selling comics, we're selling fun, and this is really more of a bar without alcohol. It's a bar with comic books, and to that, it's a very good analogy. So to that regard, the comic book store is a community center, and you don't have that with message boards. You don't have that with forums and stuff like that. It's just not enough of a replacement. What I think you see a lot of with our customers is a lot of our customers do also read digital. Here's what I hear a lot. I hear, I don't replace my comics with digital ones, but I read the free ones or the $1 ones digitally, and if I like it, then I come in and I buy the print collection. I hear that all the time. Like they did, Comixology did a sale on Saga #1 last year. It was 99 cents, or it might have been free. I can't remember. But I had a slew of people come in and say, hey, I just read Saga on Comixology. Can I buy the trade paperback? To that regard, I really like the digital stuff, right? Because it's exposing us to new material.
All right. What would you say is probably the most popular book? What has the highest sale, so to speak, at your store?
You know what? Universally, Batman. Batman is always the best-selling single comic book in the store. Whenever they do a big crossover, those usually kick in and take over a little bit, but it's always Batman.
Yeah, especially with the fact that he has about 5 different titles right now at the moment.
Yeah. Right. And the thing about Batman is with all these different titles he has and his undeniable popularity, I think it's safe to say he's probably the most popular comic book character because he has such a wide appeal even beyond comic readers. The thing about Batman is he attracts some of the best talent in comics, and he has since the 70s. Going as far back as Dennis O'Neil and Neil Adams, and then on to Frank Miller, and the biggest names in comic all want to work on Batman. And so he's probably got a lot of crappy stories too, but we just forget about those. He has so many iconic stories. I think that's why he remains popular to this day.
Yeah, and there's just that legacy to him. People just want to write for him because it has that huge boost in morale, I would think, for yourself when you're writing it. Like for me, I'm a huge X-Men fan, and sometimes it can be just overwhelming with the fact there are so many books and so many different stories with so many different writers, so many different styles, and so to speak. Well, Carmelo, thank you so much for coming with us today. You want to just shout out a quick link to your Kickstarter so people know where to find you?
Yeah, you can find us on Kickstarter. I think it's I have a bit link. It's bit.ly/MAGNF. You can find Chimera's Comics on Facebook is probably the best way to get in touch with us. Stay up to date on our new comics coming out. And actually in a couple months, I'll be releasing a book too on how to run your own Kickstarter campaign. So keep your eyes out for that too.
Awesome. Great. Well, thank you so much for coming with us. We'll see you next time.
Take care. Have a good one.
You too.